Russia was right about Iraq and Libya, but America and Britain were completely wrong. Regime changes do not appear to be changing Middle Eastern countries for the better, as Vladimir Putin has been warning about for years. His policy is to refuse support for any armed groups, trying to forcefully resolve internal problems. By these groups, he means the rebels, both moderate and not so. According to him, the Kremlin has always had a feeling of anxiety that by supporting these armed groups, we can bring the situation to an absolute dead end. We do not know the ultimate goal of these freedom fighters. We fear that the region may plunge into chaos. Having thus scolded the West for its interventions for 15 years without unsanction, Putin himself has now unilaterally brought Russian troops into Syria, which the former CIA director calls geopolitical Chernobyl. Russia has become an ally of Syria, Iraq and Iran in a new coalition. As Syrian President Bashar al-Assad put it last week, no more, no less. How and why has Putin not taken his own advice about the unintended consequences lurking in the Middle East swamp? And most importantly, how does he manage, at least for now, to make the Russian intervention in Syria look like a diplomatic triumph? Russia's determined intervention makes Obama and Cameron look like confused weaklings. When the usually patriotic readers of the New York Daily News were asked who had the stronger argument, Putin or Obama, 96% said it was Putin. In Britain, even hawks like Sir Max Hastings, who is by no means a friend of the Kremlin, say Russia can help defeat ISIS. And most importantly, Putin became the main character of the show at the UN General Assembly session last month, delivering a deadpan speech in which he denounced the entire US-backed democracy project in the Middle East from start to finish. The Arab Spring was a disaster, Putin said, and Western countries that had incited Arab Democrats to rise up against their immoral and dishonest old rulers had opened a Pandora's box of misfortune and horror. Instead of the triumph of democracy and progress, we got violence, poverty, social catastrophe, and human rights, including the right to life, are not put in anything, he told the assembled delegates, addressing his words to the White House. It makes me want to ask those who created this situation, do you even understand now what you have done? This message contains the whole outlook of Putin. Stability and predictability are better than the suspense and volatility of a revolution is a belief the Kremlin took to itself at a time when a wave of color revolutions swept away Putin's allies throughout the post-Soviet bloc. When the Arab Spring in Egypt and Libya destroyed Putin's cronies Hosni Mubarak and Muammar Gaddafi, he thought the same way. The Assad family are allies that Putin has inherited since the days of Leonid Brezhnev, and they are simply the last allies left to Moscow in today's world, which has been turned upside down by popular power and its unpredictable consequences. By supporting Assad, Putin is fighting not only the West and its support for democracy. He opposes the very idea of popular protest aimed at power. In the Syrian adventure, Putin appears to be a determined man because he at least knows who his allies are, and just as importantly, who his enemies are. But the US and Britain oppose almost all major groups fighting in Syria. The West is fighting not only Assad and his supporters, in the form of the Lebanese forces from Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but almost all of his opponents, such as the Islamic State, the al-Qaeda affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra, and Ash-Sham. Yes, there is a small handful of moderate Sunni opposition groups in Syria who are armed and trained by the CIA. In Washington, one can still hear tales of an apolitical, non-sectarian and cohesive, new Syrian opposition army holding territories against both Assad and jihadists and creating an inclusive government for all. Cameron said this week that he wants Assad out because not all Syrians recognize him. He still seems to think that simple and direct regime change is still possible. This sort of strategy might have seemed workable in 2001, but now that American-trained local forces have utterly collapsed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, no one will fall for it. The most effective troops in Syria fighting ISIS with American backing are the Kurdish YPG rebels. But the US is powerless to stop its NATO ally Turkey, which is bombing the YPG in retaliation for the actions of Kurdish guerrillas on its territory, although they have nothing to do with Syrian civilians.